Good evening. Tonight is September 22nd, and we're here for the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee of the Guilderland Public Schools. I'd like to call this meeting to order. The first item on our agenda is the minutes, but first we'll do the pledge. So if you can all join me, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. If anybody got a chance to read, our last meeting was on June 22nd. Does anybody have any comments, or is there a motion to approve those minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Thank you, Joe. A second? Gloria? Any comments or questions? All right, all in favor? Thank you. All right, the first item, next item on our agenda tonight is the introduction of our new DEI director. I am very pleased and honored to welcome Mr. Matthew Pinchnut, our new director, our inaugural director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion for the Guilderland Central School District. And I'd like to give Matt the floor to have the opportunity to introduce himself.
Thank you so much, Amy. I appreciate the introduction, and I will share just some brief slides with everyone and speak from there. Now, this is going to be pretty visual because that's just the way I operate. And I chose the name for this based off of the first assignment that anyone who's had me as a teacher, it's to tell their story. So I'd like to share just a little bit of mine with you. Now, this picture, some of you may be wondering, is that actually him? Believe it or not, this is Photoshop. So I know it looks very realistic. I also was confused at first when I saw it. I thought that, it's striking resemblance Kevin Durant and I have. But the reason why I chose to use this image was because my younger brother made it for me. And this was something that he gave to me, as a gift and as a form of congratulations in moving into this role. And some of the things that are most important to me are family. And my mom, when she saw it, she thought it was the sweetest thing ever. And I'm still not entirely certain that she knew just how photoshopped it is. But the secondary piece of this, aside from my family, which is one of the most important things to me, it's the idea of a story. And so this Photoshop is taken from the Players Tribune, which is a platform for athletes to be able to share their stories in the sports world or otherwise. And I believe that stories are going to be how we can have one avenue and one venue for change in our community. At the start of this year, I began in the classroom, and something that I shared with the students was that we might all have a place on the timeline when we organize ourselves according, youngest to oldest, and did it without speaking. It was a tough task, but everyone kind of saw a human timeline there. And the important part of that timeline wasn't just, who's youngest and who's oldest, but it was a matter of, what does that story mean? And we might have two people who are 15 or two people who are 17, and each of their stories looks different. And I think that's part of the beauty of our community in Guilderland, is that we have such a range of stories. I'd love to bring forth and privilege everyone's stories. And in my next chapter, everyone who knows me and who I've had the pleasure of working with knows that teaching is something that runs marrow deep for me. It's one of those hereditary things. My father was a teacher. And this next chapter is one that I'm so excited for, because just like teaching runs marrow deep and it's something that I love to my core, this touches on all of the things that made teaching that for me. The ability to respect and share everyone's stories and bring in the strengths that we have. Diversity, of course, we have racial diversity, but also just the diversity of talents and diversity of locations and skills and interest, and bring those forth in the classroom. And the equity piece, I've been fortunate enough to be a part of the Focus program for my entire time at Guilderland. And if that program has taught me anything, the top thing would be the value of equity and the iron type ironclad belief for me that every student deserves a chance to succeed, and that it's not just something that should happen, but it's incumbent on us to provide our students with that opportunity. And of course, inclusion. I've had the privilege of being a co-teacher for the past few years, and seeing our students working in concert with one another and functioning as greater than the sum of their individual parts has been something that has brought me so much joy. So as I move into this next chapter, I will not be bringing Photoshop talents with me, but what I do hope to bring are the stories that have led me to where I am today. And so some may be wondering, what is my thought process? What is it that I'm hoping to bring directly to everyone? And I'll leave it with just this. From the book that we have done some work through, 5 practices for equity-focused school leadership. In the preface, there's a quote there, that as we are increasingly engaged in open and honest conversations about race, gender, disability, and the other aspects of identity, I want to support that. And I had the privilege of working at the high school for many years. And one of my top priorities this week has been to make it into each of our buildings over the course of this week. And I had the joy, Linwood was the spot that I got to go to today, and seeing all of those different stories come together and the warm welcome from students, that is a very, very clear reminder of the value of this work. So I'm very grateful to be here, and thank you to everyone for welcoming me on board. I look forward to working alongside you and with you and growing together.
Thank you so much, Matt. I'm thrilled to have you join our committee and step into this new role. So thank you for that fabulous introduction. And I know we'll all get to know Matt really, really well as we continue our leading of this work and continue our learning on our committee together. The next item on our agenda is membership. So there are currently 2 vacant positions on our committee when two members of our committee moved out of the district. So the school board is seeking another member to fill the board position. And Dr. Wiles will reach out to all Guilderland staff to seek out interested employees to fill the position that was vacated. So I'd like to discuss now that process for filling that position and get some feedback from our members as far as filling those 2 positions. So you can feel free to use the hand raise or use the chat. Seema?
I just wanted to mention that I shared this with the board, that there's a position open that Ben goes used to sit on this committee, and there was someone interested in the committee, and we just appointed a new board member last night, Kim Blasiak. So I did not get an opportunity yet to ask her if she was interested. I thought I'd wait until we have our new board member, and so probably by the next meeting the next meeting for this committee, we'll have that new board member join.
Great. Thanks, Seema. Barb?
I just wanted to reiterate what Seema has said. I think last time round, Kim had applied for membership here, and I think she'd be a great addition.
And that'd be for the board seat. So just to clarify, there's 2 seats open on the committee. One was a representative of the Board of Education, and the other was a staff member. Kelly? All set.
Very go. This may be another discussion afterwards, but is this a part of the conversation to talk about how we're all 2-year terms and we're all going to be
What a great segue, Kelly.
in 2 years? Thanks. All right.
That's actually our next agenda item. I'll leave the floor open for a couple more minutes for comments on how to, filling those 2 seats, and then we'll segue right into the member terms, and I'll kind of explain that for a moment. Elizabeth, and then Barb again.
I don't know if it's appropriate is it okay to mention who has left our committee? Is that okay to say?
Sure, yeah.
Nidra.
Nidra,
So
who was an E&L teacher at the middle school and was on our steering committee, is now working in another district and not in the area.
Just wanted to say how much we're going to miss her, because she was so great. What a powerhouse. Like she's very quiet and charming, but then she's like totally getting things done and it's great. So really hard to replace Nidra. But really
Agreed. Nidra, if you're listening, Nidra, thank you for everything you did in the last year for this committee.
sorry to see her go.
Barb and then Nicole.
I just wanted to say that Matt would be the ideal fit to take Nedra's place on the steering committee, I think. And the other idea that I had is that we had a list of really great people from the community. And, all the staff members that wanted to be on the original committee here. Maybe we could look at that list and, make a determination from that as well.
Thanks, Barb. Nicole?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that this position would be for a staff person. Is that correct? Since it was a staff opening?
I believe that's correct, Dr. Wells.
Yes, that's correct.
Great, because again, I echo Elizabeth's sentiments about Nadra, so I just wanted to make sure that we were going to get somebody that had similar duties as she did. So thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Any other comments on the filling of the staff member or the board member representative? Elizabeth?
I thought that Matt was already on this committee kind of more or less as a liaison or something. So if we, say Matt is our person, then it's like we're losing one person because we could have had somebody plus Matt, right? Isn't Matt kind of on this as it is? Like I
Yes.
assume he'll be coming and
De facto.
be involved. Okay, yeah. So I think we should get somebody else besides Matt. Then we'll have more input.
So to Barbara's point, I still have the folder of those who expressed interest when we did this back on October 23rd of 2020, which feels like a decade ago. But I also have a note or a letter drafted to our entire staff to see if there are others who, now that they see what this looks like, may have an interest as well. And in addition, those who expressed interest a year ago may not. So I thought if we sent out a new letter, and I could mention in there that if you have submitted a letter in the past and you want to be included, just let me know. So I'm sitting on this letter to all staff, kind of awaiting the outcome of this conversation. So the two data points that I need to finish the letter are when should it be due? And then what's the process for deciding who among those who send letters? The board worked through that process last year. I don't know if we want to have the board do it or does this committee do it? So those are some things I thought about as I was actually putting pen to paper.
Barb? Barb, I think you're muted.
I think the board process worked very well the last time. There's only 9 people trying to make a determination versus 20. So I would recommend just using the same process. Have the board, it is a board committee, have the board, appoint a new person to the staff position.
Any other thoughts and comments on the process for choosing the person or also the timeline, Kelly?
Yeah, I had a thought and process and like, since we have this board already established, maybe I don't want to go against Barbara. Maybe it should be this group or part of this group, maybe the steering committee, that we could have a little bit more input than just the people that selected this board. I don't know. Just my thought.
Okay, Gloria?
I was wondering what the term would be. Are we going to just have them complete the term, which would be just this, year? Because we're all going to be ending our second year, or does this begin their first year of a 2-year term?
I think that's a really good question that again, our next topic is member terms. So I'll do a couple more comments and then we'll kind of segue, and really they're very related. So Elizabeth and then Seema.
Oh yeah, that Yeah, that reminds me of, we had talked at one point about the problem of, if our terms aren't staggered, then we're all gonna just cut out of here at the same moment, and there's gonna be a whole bunch of people that, are new, which could be okay, but it's a little weird, so.
Yeah, agreed. Seema?
I think when we talk about the staggering of the positions, we can get to that, but whoever replaces Nidra's position, it would just be fulfilling that seat. So it wouldn't start anything new. It would just be filling that time.
I think that makes sense and it's consistent with how other board positions, given that it's a board position, board committee, how other board positions work. Nora?
I was just thinking, considering the employee like staff, like be mindful of like a lot of teachers are probably writing like recommendations, like being a senior, I know that. So with the deadline, like especially like the early decision, early action deadline approaching fast, just be mindful of that.
Good to keep in mind. And all the other polls on teachers' times. So I'll start to segue into our next agenda item, which is the member term. So like we've mentioned, so we were appointed to serve a 2-year term. However, that means that all members of the committee would turn over at the end of this school year, the 21-22 school year. So when the steering committee met, we'd like to suggest a plan for creating staggered terms so that there's continuity in membership and also opportunity for new members to be appointed. And so I think the question would be how would we manage those staggered terms? How would we decide whose term is up at the end of this year versus who would continue so that we would have some continuity? So I think the steering committee is open to ideas and thoughts. Maxine?
I think it makes sense for the students to stay on until they graduate. I don't know if it makes a ton of sense for us to sort of stop this project halfway through. I mean, I personally would love to see this to the end of my graduation.
Joe?
We could certainly see if anyone in particular was looking for their term to, they're looking at it. They originally signed on for 2, but maybe you're thinking now that that's not a commitment that they would be able to see through. And we could see if that at least frees up any spots to have turnover sooner.
I think that's a good idea. I think that, there might be some of us who didn't know what we were getting into, and maybe the committee is different than we envisioned. So you would be happy with the 1.5, 2-year commitment that it was. And there may be others that would like a longer term. Gloria?
Well, I'm just thinking back to when this group was kind of founded and what we stated, and some of the things we said in the initiation of this committee was that it would be 2-year terms. So but I understand the problem with the staggering too, but I think we need to keep to that. But I am open to, for at least this first year, to establish some longer terms and shorter terms so that we have some people maybe that continue on and then others fall off in a year and then maybe the year after, because there are going to want to be other people that want to come on and have some input. And I think that's important. And we stated it that way in the very beginning, that we would have an opportunity for people to join.
Yep, absolutely. Nora, then Nicole?
So I was wondering, do we have a certain limit of people that we can have on the board? I know we mentioned wanting to keep the group smaller so that we could have better discussions, but I was just wondering about how many people can be on the board if there's a limit.
Someone can refresh my memory, but I believe the original intention was around 20, not including board members and ex officio, right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
It's 20, but the board president and the superintendent and Regan is our assistant superintendent for HR, ex officio. Technically, Matt could be ex officio too, because he'll always be on it and not subject to term limits. But that's what got us to our numbers.
Makes sense. Nicole, then Kelly?
Yeah, I was wondering, would there be a chance to reapply? I know a lot of people were interested in the beginning, and we to kind of go through an application again. So therefore, it would be open to people that have been on the committee before, but also have the new people. So perhaps that's a way we can kind of get varying experiences.
Okay. Kelly?
Not to add more complex items to it, but like there's also people moving within different categories. For example, Gloria, me, and Barb are all up for re-election in May. We don't know what's going to happen with that. There may be people that are going to move out of the district, maybe people that are in the teacher area that leave our district and now are a community member or things like that. So I don't have an answer. I just want to throw it out as another complex inner working of this particular group.
I think that's an important point because I feel like at one point there had been a thought of like a certain number of community members, a certain number of staff, a certain number of board members, et cetera. Leah, then Barbara.
It's actually a perfect segue into my comment. I'm wondering if there could be some wisdom in like the students doing the longer term makes sense since they have the institutional knowledge as well as the teachers, but community members, there were so many community members interested in being on them. It might make sense to turn us over a little more frequently than people who are actually affiliated with the school or the students.
Barb?
My thought was to sort of pick up on Joe's suggestion to sort of survey the current members, see if any of them automatically, have other things that they're interested in now. But then take the groups. I know we had community members, we had staff, we had the board members, another group there. And those who are interested to extend the terms of however we want to stagger things, just have a draw of the hat. The four community members, two of them would stay on an extra year, two of them, would have to be off for at least, a year, or if we want to even stagger it more than that. But I think that'd be the fairest way to do it. As I said, just a draw of the hat, and in that group of individuals, the two who get drawn stay an extra year or 2 years or whatever, the group decides. So that's just one thought.
I do like Joe's idea about getting some personal preference. So I wonder if it would be a good idea after the meeting to send out a Google form asking who would like to move on at the end of the school year and who would like to continue. How do people feel about that? Okay. Maxine?
I hear like a lot of like longer terms, but do we have any idea how much longer those terms would be? Especially for teachers, because students are the longest they can be on is for like 3.5 to 4 years. So I was just wondering if we could come up with maybe a number for that.
I think that'd be a good idea, but I think similar to what Gloria said, the initial intention was to have 2-year terms. And so the idea of adjusting the term length right now would be only for the idea of staggering the term limits. So I guess the question is, other than the idea of staggering the term limits, would any of the term limits be longer than 2 years after this initial staggering? So I'm not sure if that's a decision made by us or if that's a larger board decision. Seema?
Maybe we can do that Google form that you mentioned to get an idea first of who's interested in staying. And like Gloria mentioned, I know that we wanted to do 2 years, like we said at the beginning, but obviously doing all of that at the same time won't work. So I think we need to think a little bit through. And it sounds like there's going to be some shifting anyways with replacing Nidra, replacing Ben. so maybe we can think about it within the next meeting time. I don't want to rush to put everybody in the spot to just come up with a number.
There's no initial rush. You know, if we were thinking about timeframes, I think it would be helpful maybe to know by maybe January what our terms are. But I don't see a reason to necessarily know before then, because we know we're all going until the end of the school year. I'll hit up the I agree on the middle school.
Just out of curiosity, when in theory did the terms begin?
December.
Okay.
Was our first meeting. December 2020 was our very first meeting.
Okay. So then 2 years would be December of 2022?
I suppose so.
Okay.
Unless we wanted to keep it on a similar time frame with just the school cycle and the regular boards.
Yep.
The regular
Okay.
board cycle, like was mentioned, like with people being you know, elected on or off. We might want to have that consistency. Seema?
I just wanted to echo the comments in the chat about FMS and maybe the upper grades in the elementary school, because I think that was an intention that we talked about early on, was to not just talk about just at the high school, but how can we get this work, you know, spread to the other 6 buildings? And so now that Matt is here, and it sounds like Dee mentioned that there's probably students who would like to be involved, maybe we can think about a way to get the littles or middles involved as well.
Great. So just to kind of circle back to our discussion on membership and also member terms, after this meeting, we'll send out a Google form because we do need to stagger some terms for this particular timeframe to get a sense of the membership of the committee for who wants to stay on for longer and who's interested in stepping down, knowing that there are a lot of other people that are interested in being on the committee. Do we agree that that's a good first step, and perhaps we could go from there? All right, anything else to add before we move on? Okay. All right, so the next item on our agenda is the report out from our subcommittees. I know we haven't met since June, and I know that some subcommittees have or have not been meeting over the summer, just based on availability over the summer, and also in anticipation of the hiring of our awesome director, Matt. But if each subcommittee now could provide a brief statement about where you left off with your work at the end of the school year, any update on progress you might have made over the summer. And at the first meeting of your subcommittee, which we'll ask you to set up after this meeting, what we're going to encourage you to do is set goals so that you can report out on those goals in our October meeting. So when you meet those goals would be something that you'd like to accomplish, you know, by mid-year or perhaps by the end of this year. We'll start with communications. Who would be the representative from communications? Maxine.
That would be me. Most of us weren't available over the summer. I don't think we did not meet as a group. Where we left off was with our website. We wanted to sort of wait until the position of like the DEI coordination was filled so that we could continue with the website after and add more information on that. But we left off with outlining some of the important information and sections we want to have on the website, and starting to draw up plans for how we're going to communicate our messages to the wider public so that they don't get misinterpreted. And then if anyone else has anything, they can also jump in.
Okay, thanks, Maxine. Next is community engagement. Who's going to report out from engagement?
I'll be happy to share out for community engagement. So this is what I was involved in before, you know, moving into this role. And our subcommittee faced the same challenges that communication did, where we weren't able to really meet over summer. Although at the beginning of this year, the group did have some correspondence through email, and so the group was all in communication. And we decided that following this meeting, and seeing what might happen in terms of new membership. We'll plan to have our meeting in October, and from there, we'll jump back onto our initiatives. And some of the things, just a refresher for anyone, where we had left off, we had subgroups involved in professional development, curriculum, and then broader community engagement. So members of the subcommittee had chosen different things that they wanted to be involved in, and we'd like to continue that and bring some of that work to fruition.
Great. Thanks, Matt. Next is the research subcommittee.
Hey, I'm Luis. Well, for the summer, this subcommittee is kind of idle. Didn't get a chance to meet, but we lost Ben because he left. I think we'll get together next week to see what new members we can get. So far, we only have three persons so far in our subcommittee, and we are focusing on the neighborhood school districts research. But as we discussed last time, we would like to do more research on our own school district in terms of policy and practices this semester, because we have more chance of interaction with the teachers, students, and also the audit committee members. Yeah, we will resume, but for summer, yeah, kind of idle.
Luis, I think that was
Except
similar
for
to a
reading
lot
a
of the
book.
committees, right? Summer scheduling is tough. So for the audit committee, we were in a pretty similar place. Joe worked really hard to try and get us together.
We met in July. I
Yeah.
would like that noted. We met
Yes.
in July. Thank you
Yes.
very much.
Yes, and we also were anxiously awaiting the appointment of Matt. And Matt and I already had a conversation about the large role that he's going to play in our committee, because it is, as we've talked about it, it is a lot of work to do the equity audit, and Matt is just the person we've been waiting for. So we're going to go full steam ahead, right, Matt? Okay, so thank you everybody for the subcommittees. Now on to our learning component. So we received copies of the 5 practices for equity-focused school leadership. And we're gonna have a little discussion about the first section, which is called Prioritizing Equity Leadership, Adopting a Transformational Approach. So we'll open it up for some open discussion, but just to give some framework for those who haven't read who are watching and haven't read it. There were two sections, or quote unquote chapters, in this first section. The first one talked about the challenge and the urgency of leadership for equity, and went through the pyramid of levels of systemic inequity. And the second part really dovetailed nicely with the introduction that Matt gave, and talked about the stories we tell, and how the stories we tell are woven into our equity practice, and why the stories we tell about specifically why we don't do better. So I will open the floor to anyone who wants to bring up the idea of the levels of systemic equity, or the impact the stories. Just for your reference, there are reflection questions on page 16, 18, and 31. If those would help to take a look at those questions as we have our discussion. Yeah.
I just want to say I really liked this book so far, and I think it's very well done. And I thought it was a really great jumping off point for us starting the new year again, were these really interesting sort of profiles of different type of people. I certainly identified with one of them, and that was nice because oftentimes I feel as a person of color, when I read diversity materials, they aren't talking to me or what the challenges I have in trying to do this work. And I think it really did a great job of underscoring that none of us are experts. We all have something to learn in this process, and I'm really excited about this book. And I had never thought about sort of framing things. I thought was very powerful was changing your language to, instead of saying they don't speak English, saying they speak Tagalog at home or what have you. I thought that was a really nice example of things you can do to change the discussion.
Thank you. Nicole?
One thing that I took away that I thought was very helpful is, again, to be open to everybody's stories and not to just because you experience something that's how it is, and really listen and not reject an idea or come in with preconceived notions of, well, maybe you think it's this way. It's however that person experienced it. So it's really important, I think, with this committee too. And I think the students did a great job with getting their gathering of people telling the stories, that it's so important for us to know, those that aren't in the school every day and dealing with this, that what is going on. Because I had my experience, but that was 20 some odd years ago and in a different school district and whatnot. And I need to know, it's important for me to know what's going on now.
Thank you. Well, I think one of the really interesting parts of looking at stories and examining stories in relation to this work is looking at other people's stories and really understanding and personalizing the work, but also looking at your own story, examining your own story and where you fit in, and what kind of assumptions you make based on your own personal experiences. Nora?
I was going to say, when I was reading the part about the stories that we tell, and not the negative kind that we use to excuse our actions, but the stories that really help us understand other people, all I could think about was the rally and just how like impactful listening to other people's stories were. And I just wanted to share that.
I completely agree. I wonder if anybody who helped to organize the rally had anything to add about why you chose to share stories at the rally, to share personal stories rather than, stories in the news. Maxine?
All 4 students on this committee were heavily involved in the planning of our rally. And we chose to share personal stories because the stories on the news don't capture what's going on specifically at our school. People have heard the stories on the news, but they haven't heard stories from students that they are actively trying to make a safer environment for. We felt that it was more powerful to hear stories from the heart that on things that they were experiencing and things that we need to do better, so that adults would more easily understand the exact things that we're going through and how we can work together to fix them.
Absolutely, so powerful. Matt?
One thing that I'd like to add to what Maxine just shared, a deep belief that I have in the community is that no matter where people might lie on a litany of issues, everyone wants the success of all of our students. And there's a reason why we use language like our kids, our students, our children, our community, because I do believe that that's a really, really core value that we have here in Guilderland. And so hearing the stories of students, I believe that it not only brings things to life, but it creates something that is essential for progress to happen, and that's empathy. And now it's not just this lofty idea of, oh, well, I know these things happen. It's, oh my gosh, that happened to Maxine. Oh my gosh, that happened to Nora. And so all of a sudden now it's a person. And so I think that the value of it really can't be understated. And I heard from people beyond the Guilderland community who watched or who read about it. A lot of people this summer spoke with me about that and about how powerful they thought that it was. And so I just think that those type of events are things we can't let fall to the wayside, nor should we underestimate the power of our own voices.
Completely agree, Matt. Leah?
Agree. And just to piggyback on that, I think the way we listen to each other's stories is so powerful. I felt sort of burnt out by the end of last year's work. And then when we watched the video together, I was watching other people on the call sort of reacting to some of these powerful stories. And there were points that we kind of all cringed or, looked shocked. And to me, that was sort of just as powerful to remind me of why we were all here and that this is important to us. So I think to the extent we can work these experiences in through our work this year, it will help us stay sort of focused on the goal and kind of what we're all here to do.
I think that's a really good point to focus on, not just how much you tell your story, but how much you listen to others. The balance of how much space you take up versus how much space you give to others. Gloria?
I found a section on the stories we tell about why we don't do better really gripping for me as a teacher, because I hear these. I mean, I've heard these things. I've heard people say things like this, and they really are excuses. But people actually that I know, believe them. I mean, they believe that, for example, oh, this group of kids, well, they just don't want to learn, or their parents don't care about. They're excuses that the person can use so that the work isn't done, or that they don't stretch themselves to make an effort. So it's those kind of biases and assumptions that kind of block them from moving forward. I found that extremely gripping because I see that as barriers that we'll have to work through. They will just have to be challenged and discussed and put to the side, because I think they are there. They're real.
Dee?
So even I heard Gloria, and as I was reading this, reading it from the perspective of a teacher in the district, I think some things different stood out for me. And it's I appreciate being challenged, and I've become more cognizant of what words I'm using, but I've also become more aware of what my colleagues are saying. And I just somehow getting that it's okay to be challenged, and some buy-in. That's what I took away from, especially the last couple pages. It's our job, and we have to somehow become vested, like I've become after reading this, after joining this part of the committee, that somehow to make people feel as passionate as we do about it.
Thank you, Joe.
One of the things is that if we're not challenging ourselves and each other, we're not actually growing. And that's kind of hard because that gets really uncomfortable, but that's it. That's the journey. There's a reason why it's called work, right? And that's
Absolutely.
not fun
Jill?
always. Sometimes those confrontations are uncomfortable, they're difficult, but that's what it is.
Kelly?
Okay. Oh, so I forgot my book at work. I'm like going off of memory here, and one of the things in the earlier chapters that really struck me was something we've been talking about doing quite a bit is getting a baseline of an equity audit going. And I feel like we could talk about it all day long, about educating our 20 group of people and this and that, but until we like really move forward and make progress on school suspensions or this or that or whatever data we're gonna look at, we could talk about it all day. But I think we really need to. That's what struck me as like, okay, we need to start there and do it sooner than later, so we kind of have a direction.
Yep. Dee?
I found myself thinking the same exact thing, and I'm on the audit subcommittee, and I have a lot of little yellow sticky notes that say we need to have poor Mike Bastian get this, and we need to have Mike Bastian extract this data for us, and then we're going to be able to move forward really well, I think.
I think so too. And as powerful as the story piece is, and is really critical to the work, I really felt like just that triangle from historical, structural, institutional, the individual, interpersonal, I felt like that gives a good framework to each of the different committees the audit especially, as I'm thinking about how the audit will be framed, making sure that we get to each of those 4 levels is really important. Leah?
In that same vein, I tend to want to come down to the granular always in the personal narratives, but I found the various stats on the intersection of special education classifications and students of color was really horrifying. The numbers that were presented, and that really spoke the case for. I don't know what they are. The numbers would be like here. I think, like some of the people in the audience in the book, I would think to myself, that doesn't happen here. I've had a wonderful experience as a parent with special needs, but that institutional piece of it really was eye opening. I mean, you hear the stories, but the way it was presented there was really kind of, I had to pull up my highlighter and highlight the whole page.
Matt?
To that end, some of the definitions also really stood out to me. The framing of language that was used, such as systemic being the problem lies in the system and the inequities are symptoms and results, and language like transformative. And all of this builds up to the pyramid in, from page 9, 10, 11, even, 12, they all go into that. And 12 is where you start to see some of the examples. And I think that one of the things that is really important is to think about, and this was something, in the classroom, I would bring this up, housing, and how that's a substantial thing. That's one tangible piece. If we want data points, that's a data point that we can look at and say directly, this group of people did not have access to this. And so how did that shape, the way that we are as a society right now? And so I think that those data points are going to be equally valuable to us moving forward.
Elizabeth?
I thought the section about the historical inequity was really interesting, and I wish that we could somehow publish this for the community to read or something. But just the idea that that wealth accumulates over history, so that when people are able to buy a house cheaply on the GI Bill, they can hand it down to their children and their children's children, and those children might not have to worry about paying a rent. So and in the same way, poverty also accumulates through generations as well. And so when people who had to buy houses in redline, because of redlining houses, in the city that wound up being way more expensive than houses in the suburbs, and then had to work a couple of jobs to pay for that housing, and were never home, to be able to take care of their kids or something. All that stuff accumulates over the generations too. And the stuff in the next section about apartments was really interesting. I don't know if part of our equity audit could be sort of looking at the different elementary schools and the different, makeup of the elementary schools, and whether, things like, apartments versus, single family housing, whether, how that plays into, I don't know if it does have any relation to what goes on at the different elementary schools, but it's an interesting question, especially because like Guilderland right now is looking at building a whole many more apartments throughout the town. And so some people are interested right now in trying to encourage developers to be required to add to include Section 8 housing in their projects as a service to the community. We don't have a lot of Section 8 housing right now in Guilderland, but some people are, I think, encouraging developers to think about adding more. So apartments are going to be more and more of a presence in Guilderland. So it's interesting to me to think about that.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Joe, did you have your hand up? No, okay, Louis?
I have some thought about this this saying, I have to raise the test scores. That's what this is all about. Well, I want to say test scores are still very important. I mean, we don't want to underestimate this because this is one of the things that that has absolute kind of fairness. If you overemphasize the soft skills or anything that kind of more subjective in grading, that would I would say go to the other extreme. I mean, we certainly need to have a system which does not only count on the test scores, but this has to be, I mean, careful. That's my point. That's for the fairness, because at the end of the day, you don't want to recommend a person completely based on subjective conclusions.
Seema?
I thought some of the things that were in the first section interesting, not just because of the equity piece, but because of the timing with COVID. And for example, the whole idea of deficit language and how we get used to talking or hearing our colleagues or friends speak like that. But I like the idea of thinking about it as a coping mechanism. And so when people are drained and tired and frustrated and not knowing what else to do, that might be a way that they cope or deal with it, but to not be dismissive of that, because I think like the first section highlighted that we're all in it together. It can't be sections or groups of people to make change in the district. The other piece that I also thought was interesting, actually Louis just touched upon that, was the whole testing piece. And I know we've talked about this at the board for a bit too, and how we're, again, after COVID, focused more on social emotional learning. And so I thought it was an interesting time to talk about it. It just keeps intertwining with equity and COVID. It's like we can't separate, can't detangle the two. And so, maybe at some point we can find out. I think, if I remember correctly, Dr. Wells, that the administrators read this book or part of this book in the summer. So it would be interesting to find out what they thought of it as well.
Just to flesh that out a little bit, and any of the admin folks on the call can jump in. But yes, we spent our 2-day retreat at the end of July focused in on this particular book. We looked at the first 2 sections of the book. So like practice 1, which we're talking about tonight, and then we did practice 2 as well. And, we really tried to make connections between what we read in the book and the ideas there, and then what it means for us when we're back at school and with kids and trying to lead, and really trying to make those concrete, practical connections between what we read and then what we actually do when we're called upon to act. So I don't know, Mike or Regan, it was one of our best retreats ever. We were so much able to talk about things in both a theoretical, an idea, but also what does this mean for our work? So go ahead. Sorry, Amy, I can't help it.
No, go ahead, Regan.
I just was going to echo what Marie said. I felt the same way, that it really was the best retreat in terms of the content that we've had. The team did a great job planning and chunking up the time. And we were teaching each other. We worked in groups all throughout the 2 days. It was, like I said, the best one that I've been a part of.
Maxine, then Mike.
I thought it was interesting, the point about fairness and test scores, because for me, my next question is like, well, what makes something fair? If there are certain students that are automatically at a disadvantage because of the situations that they're put in, their race, ethnicity, disability, sexual identity, and gender identity, how do we determine fairness? Because everyone has a different place that they come from and different privileges that put them ahead or behind people.
Good point, Mike, and then Mirzad.
So I too really enjoyed the summer work that we did surrounding this book. I think there was some definitely actionable items that the admin team walked away with that we could apply in our daily work as we worked through, some of the chapters. Particularly in the first section, some of the things that sort of resonated with me, which reaffirmed, some things that we've been talking about is, number one, equity work is a collective enterprise. It's not an individual conversation. So us being able to have these conversations with other people around our school community is essential, in my opinion. I also think that, moving towards equity is not a linear process. That struck to me too. It's going to be messy. We have to expect emotion. We have to expect that it's not going to be a clean ride, and that's okay. And I think that takes courageous leadership. Because we need to know moving forward that some of the conversations may be uncomfortable with members of our school community, and that's okay. And we need to sort of frame those conversations so that people, even if they do put up some defenses, are still comfortable sharing how they feel. So.
Great, thank you. Mirzad, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I kind of just want to echo what Maxine said regarding, the topic of test scores. I think especially now more than ever, especially like in my age group, high school students, test grades are exponentially important, whether it be standardized testing like the SAT and ACT or, just testing grades in school. Things like this are essentially setting us up for our future and what opportunities are going to be open to us. And I think that, excuse me, so when disadvantages arise, it's kind of setting people up for failure, essentially. So I think that that's a huge problem in our system. And if there was a way we could, figure out some deference to it, it'd majorly improve everything. But there's no true way of doing it.
Louis?
Yeah, I think the system need to provide the resources and help to those students who are lagging behind. It's not, we cannot change the standard. The standard should be the same for everyone. But if you just change you don't have resources, your score can be lower. That doesn't make sense. So the system got to provide, we need to find a way to help those students on system level.
Okay, any thoughts connecting the your reflections on these two pieces and your work in your subcommittee or the work of our larger committee? Andrew, then Elizabeth.
So I really read this closely, and there were three statements that really stuck out to me. And on page 30, there was this recommendation that we step back from certainty and engage with curiosity. And on page 28, they recommended that we avoid blame and instead focus on the strengths and assets that everyone brings to the situation. And on page 31, which I think is the most important thing, it says, establish your habit of learning together. And what struck me is how close this was to our definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion, about being open, being fair, and building together. Each one of them sort of parallel together. So how do we build upon our definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion and actually get actionable things that are actionable on each of the levels? Can't do anything about history, right? But the personal, the interpersonal, the institutional, and the systemic stuff, right? But in the end, what really changes everything is what individuals do themselves and interpersonally, okay? That will change the system because they're doing the thing that they need to do to bring diversity and equity and inclusion and goodness and everything to the situations they find themselves in.
Thanks, Andrew. Elizabeth and Gloria?
Yeah, I mostly wanted to talk about what Maxine said, but just in response to what Andrew just said, you said you can't do anything about history, but the only thing you can do about history is to know about it. So there is something you can do about history. But I wanted to go back to what Maxine said because it seemed like what Mirzad took away from what Maxine said might not have been the same thing that Maxine was saying. So when I heard Maxine, I thought like she was saying that kind of questioning testing as to whether it's really the best way because there are all these sort of structural problems with the situation as it is now. So whether standardized testing is really can be standard or not at all is like a question. So the actual validity of the testing, I thought was what Maxine was getting at. But then Mirzad was talking about more like helping people who might not be doing so good at the standardized testing for various reasons or something, because of some inequity. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out that I didn't think that people were agreeing about the testing idea. And I'm interested in the idea of questioning standardized testing. So.
Okay, Gloria.
I think for me, I must have written about 4 or 5 times in those first pages that we read. Is this accurate for us? Where do we fit? I kept writing that because I just feel like I'm kind of reading about some amorphous thing out there, and I keep thinking, how real is it here in Guilderland? I don't think I'm a pie in the sky kind of person, but having taught there many years, I'm wondering, where are we? Where do we fit in this whole picture? So I kept writing that constantly as I was reading through. Where are our holes? Where are our weaknesses? How are we going? And being on the audit group, that's why that kept coming up for me, I think.
Thanks, Kelly.
I think how our communications committee can relate to the book and the stories is one of the things that we were going to start working on, was getting people's stories out. I know there's already progress on that through different organizations, but it's something that we wanted to integrate as well into this, and that might also help with Gloria's kind of questioning of this is really focusing on that in the next year to get that message out of our students' experiences to lots of different places. Do whatever we can to get it out, to continue on the work that's already been done, to help however we can to get those stories out. That's how it kind of connects for me to our communications committee.
Yeah, and on the audit committee, we've had conversations about, the value of qualitative and quantitative data gathering. And, oftentimes people think of the audit as the quantitative piece, but this really does highlight the value of those qualitative stories. Barb?
I think I sort of had the same reaction that Gloria did in reading this. How does this fit into the Guilderland picture? And one thing in particular that they wrote is that, there are inequities in schools just due to the natural neighborhood school situation. Whereas you have people of the same income level, the same racial composition. And, as I look around our district, one of the things that I know that the board and the budget people have done as long as I've been on the board is really be sure that each of our elementary schools, basically has the tools and the funding that they need. There is no one school that has, less money coming to them than another school does. And from the standpoint of, say, our ELL students, which are, perhaps on the elementary level, more heavily concentrated in Guilderland and Westmere, I know probably the greatest number of teachers that we've hired over the last 10 years have been ELL teachers because there was a need and the district, tried to fill that need. So, a lot of the things that in those first couple of chapters, I was struggling with, how is it that, we're in the same category, because I didn't feel that we were. And, the same with the testing and things that Lou brought up. We have, as a district, bent over backwards to, try to reach out to the disabled community, to the ELL community. And we've put money up front to try to address those issues. So, a lot of the points that they point out, and we'll find out in our audit, our students of color, discipline more. Are our disabled students disciplined more than our non-disabled students? And I think once we get some of that data, we'll be able to relate perhaps a little bit better, to some of the statements in the book.
Thanks, Barb. Nicole, then Leah.
I agree that the audit will definitely be eye-opening, because as Barb identified with the funding and whatnot, you do as a group to try to be as fair or equitable amongst that. It still talks about the other thoughts about these kids don't want to learn, or the parents aren't involved. So you can make the funding totally the same across the board, but again, it depends from what the background that the children and the family come from, and what narrative the people that are working with those schools have to say. So that's where we have to really take a look too, is not only where is the money at, but what are the thoughts when working with a specific population.
Thanks, Nicole. Leah, then Elizabeth.
Yeah, I think to that point, the book did a really nice job of illustrating that one example of the educator who was super involved, I think, in the Latino community and the like first generation college community, but had a blind spot on LGBTQ plus issues. And the point is, I don't think any of us are here because we think this is a hopeless district that's done nothing to eradicate inequality or done nothing to care about its kids. But the audit, sharing stories, having people come talk about their personal experiences is what's going to help us get past those blind spots. And I think we all have some stuff in here that we think that will never fly here and that would never work here. And we're here to kind of push that together.
Well put, Leah. Well put. Elizabeth?
Yeah, and when we in the audit, I think we also want to look at not just things that are negative, like so which kids are being disciplined, but also which kids are being rewarded. So which kids are being singled out for, like, I don't know, enrichment or something, or things that are good, honor society or whatever, different sort of achievements, class in elementary school, they have like class leaders or something like that, so like what's the makeup of people that are, being singled out for these things, because that also has a cumulative effect as you go on in school. So anyway.
Sure does. Seema?
I just wanted to say something about, I think Barb kind of addressed, or something that Barb said, that that the district kind of bends over backwards. I don't see it as bending over backwards, but changing with, the times. I was so proud with the district, especially the students, and they were so brave. I didn't know what to expect when I went to the anti-hate rally. I didn't know they were going to share personal stories, and it was so brave of them to stand up there and do that. And so that really impacted me. So I was really proud that the district did that, supported that. It was, highlighted. But that doesn't mean that there's not work to do. There's always work to do. I feel like becoming stagnant with this kind of work would be detrimental. So I think we should applaud the district, applaud ourselves at the same time, but we still have to keep, moving forward. I don't think, there's a stop, there's an end to it.
Maxine?
I really liked what Miss Mayer said about finding the statistics about students who are like singled out and for enrichment programs. For me, I would not be involved heavily in this school if it wasn't for the opportunities that were provided to me in middle school. So I know that there are some students who are simply overlooked by teachers or don't know these opportunities exist or how to apply themselves. And I think that it's really important that we make sure that every student is being looked at, and that all kids, not just like kids who are praised, are like made aware of the opportunities that our school has.
Excellent point, Maxine. Nora?
I just wanted to kind of reiterate what Maxine said because when I read this book initially, I had kind of this. I perceived that the authors had sort of like a negative connotation with class sorting. And to me, that was um, this being able to do a higher level or a lower level and learn really to your abilities and to what you were comfortable with has always been very helpful for me. So I think that I came in with biases, but it was like sort of eye opening to read about, and I realized, especially through this discussion, that everyone should have those opportunities and everyone should be seen equally able to excel or not, or to be able to take a class that's at a lower level. Everyone should be seen with able to have any abilities, if that makes any sense.
Thanks, Nora. Matt?
I first of all want to, kind of commend you for being open, Nora. And I'd like to add that it's not just you that has bias. Everyone on this call does. Everyone watching this call, everyone who will watch this call, we all do. And the important part is one, being able to see it and acknowledge it when we, are either called out for it or when it's put in front of our face. And then, so what do we do from that point? And I think being able to take a step and being willing to learn and grow, that's the core of what this book's about. That's what this is telling us to do. It's that when we hit those roadblocks or where we see those parts of ourselves where, oh man, I wasn't even aware. That's happened to me more times than I can count. And I think the second that we start to think that we've learned it all or that we've done everything that we could have done or everything that we should do, I think that that's where we put ourselves in a very dangerous position, where we start to get too complacent, too confident, and feel not that we shouldn't celebrate our successes because that is important. But when we start resting on our laurels, or when we lose an asset-based approach to how we view students, I think in our learning and our growing, I think that's where things can get dangerous. So you have the right mentality, and I think that that's something that all of us on this call and everyone watching should try to emulate.
Thank you, Matt. As we bring our discussion to a close, any final comments or thoughts on how the book relates to how we move forward as a committee? Gloria?
I think one of the things I was thinking about a lot after I read this is that our role to provide opportunities for people to speak and share and talk, that we build these opportunities in, because they're not going to just happen on their own. I mean, people have stories to tell, and some not going to be willing to come forward. So we have to create the space, the honest, the kind of safe space for conversations to happen in our community and for things to be brought up in a safe way so that they can be looked at and examined. Because I think people walk around with these things inside them, and many of us don't even know that people are walking around hurting or having had these experiences. So any way that we can encourage that or keep that in the forefront. I got to the end of the chapter and I just I wrote down, we need to be vigilant and constantly be looking and asking and, be aware that, we may not see it. And we need to be reminded that it's probably there, and we need to constantly look for it.
Yep, and I think what goes right alongside of asking people to share their stories is being a listener, right? And encouraging all our members of our community to be listeners to each other. Leah, then Nora?
I promise I won't talk anymore after this, but I thought the really great example in the book was about a diversity committee or a DE&I committee had started, and then it ended up breaking off into subcommittees so that certain communities could feel more comfortable speaking. And the end result was they ended up joining the board. I think it was after a couple of years, and I was like, wow, this would be like a great goal for us to somehow parlay this into more engagement. And we may need to get out of our own way sometimes. We may need to let subcommittees handle things or leave the room for discussions that our presence is too centering. But the end goal, that would just be so exciting. And because this is the last thing I'll say, I just want to thank Matt for being here. I just feel the energy of this meeting is different and exciting, and I'm excited to be back and for us to do this work this year. So I'm just super, everything is different about this meeting, and I'm so happy about it.
Ditto. Nora?
Kind of just to echo what Nora said, I think definitely we have our own biases. I think it's like the assumptions we make. I like what the book said with like assuming so many things to assume. Like you look at someone and like, you know, your like first impression, like what they're wearing, you know, symbols, like what they're wearing, how they act, what they smell like. It's like all these kind of crazy things we don't, like it's unconscious. Like we don't even realize we're doing it. And like I kind of got me thinking about was it this classroom effect where they told these teachers exactly which students were like the smartest. So then so unconsciously these teachers focused more on these students, and then they did well. And they were everyone in the classroom started out the same level. All the students were the same. But like by telling the teachers like, oh, these ones are to watch out for, like when like teachers, not saying every teacher does that. Like I feel like we all make these assumptions like, oh, it's like you bet on your own horse kind of thing. But I think that's like definitely good to take in. And like I think with the high school right now, there's like the bus shortage. Like you don't realize it. You're like, oh, that must be an inconvenience. But like for some people, like we assume like, oh, everyone has transportation, everyone has mode of travel. But sometimes that's like not every senior, not every junior can drive. Like the sophomores and freshmen, they don't all have like a ride to school, so they can't stay after. Like it, and that can affect. Typically you have like more upper class people who are able to drive themselves, who are able to drive siblings or friends. So I definitely think like you can kind of like start to take that lens of assumptions and look into our community more critically. So which is something I really enjoyed about the book.
Thanks, Nora. Andrew?
I think the book does a really good job all about equity, but I think we need to think about this whole notion of leadership and where leadership is and what it looks like. I'm sure there are kids in kindergarten, okay, who are leaders already on this, and we need to get their stories out there. There are people all over, and out in the world where I was in IT. It's not about the leaders on the top. Their job is to do servant leadership and find the true leaders who are all throughout the organization, who have all different particular geniuses to do that, and to highlight them and to support them, and let them be the leaders in whatever we're trying to do.
Thanks, Andrew. Difference between positional authority and leadership. Any other last comments before we close out the discussion? Well, thank you everybody for this great discussion. I'm also really excited for this year. I appreciate the vibe tonight. The very last agenda item that we have for tonight is the idea of our future meetings and the format for our future meetings. We decided to have this meeting virtual just based on the logistics of getting this large group together in the LGI and being social distance and everybody being able to hear each other and also being able to see and hear each other on camera. And so we wanted to just briefly get some feedback on the method for future meetings, remote or in person. If anybody has thoughts on that, again, that's something I could also include on the Google form, whether people have initial thoughts on it, but it'd be great to hear some opinions and reasons for why somebody would want remote or in person. Joe and then Barb?
I think that remote is an important way for us to meet. Besides the general pointing out COVID safety and folks hearing each other, which are great practical concerns. I think it's important for us to do it because it means that things like transportation, childcare, and if someone has a physical condition or impairment or disability that would make it more difficult to come in person. And then also, for more of a convenience sake, I like that the weather doesn't ruin us trying to have a meeting in the evening in the winter. I think, you know what I mean? But I think that there's reasons why this is a very important means for us to be connecting and communicating and working together.
Barb?
I think just from the standpoint of sound and visibility, what I've seen, even with the interviews that we did last, I guess it was last night, for the board position, with the mask on, if a person has a very quiet voice, you struggle to hear them. And with this format, the sound is clear, the visuals are clear, you can see everybody's facial expressions, and the convenience of travel. For most people, it's probably an extra hour going to the high school, coming back. I like the in-person meetings when we don't have masks and we can see each other. But for the time being, I think this is an excellent way of doing it.
Thanks, Barb. Anybody have any comments just to play the other side? Does everybody want virtual, or just is anybody interested currently in doing in person, or we good to stick to virtual? Okay, that looks like consensus to me. Tried some wait time. All right. All right, so we'll continue meeting. We made a decision tonight. We'll continue meeting virtually. If there's no other discussion, I could have a motion to adjourn. Thanks, Barb. Second, Kelly. All in favor? All right. Have a great night, everybody. Thanks for joining in the discussion.